So I think one of the questions that we get is where's the fit? Where's the fit for interseeding in Pennsylvania or in the Northeast? And so I like to think of it as to ask the question, well, it's an alternative establishment method to what? What are you currently doing? And so in a lot of our production systems and regions within Pennsylvania, certainly after soybean harvest or corn taken for grain, we have a really limited growing season window to establish cover crops post-harvest, okay? So even in this area, in the center of the part of the state, if you're not getting after harvest, you know, for corn for grain or soybeans here in the next week or so, you're gonna start to run into a very narrow window for establishing cover crops, okay? And so we see this as interseeding as an alternative establishment method for those regions that can't successfully establish cover crops on a consistent basis, or if they do establish, you're not getting much growth and therefore you're not getting much conservation benefit that we want from overwintering cover crops, okay? Where is that? It's hard to pinpoint it exactly, but in general, along the Appalachian Plateau and the northern tier and from about here in the center part of the state north, we have fewer growing degree days from now through May, and we should expect to see much less cover crop growth when we're post-harvest seeding, and therefore perhaps much less benefit. Alternatively, if you're in the southeastern part of the state, we have a few more growing degree days. You're likely to be able to consistently establish at least a winter cereal cover crop after grain harvest. And in those cases, the question is, does interseeding outperform post-harvest seeded cover crops for whatever benefit you're looking for, okay? And then the question is establishment methods. So most of what we're going to talk about today is drill interseeding cover crops at early corn growth stages, early in the corn production season. There all, of course, are other alternative methods, broadcast interseeding, and when you have equipment like this, which is, this is a picture of the Highboy interseeder that the Bradford County Conservation District had for a number of years. I worked with Kevin Brown on some on-farm strip trials the past couple years. Broadcasting with a Highboy allows you a much longer window to be able to get in and interseed, and you're going to be able to do it much quicker because most of these are scaled up to maybe 90-foot booms, and you can cover a lot more ground in comparison to using a high clearance grain drill, okay? We're going to see later today, you'll be able to check out the high clearance grain drill that was developed here at Penn State and is now sold through Interseeder Technologies. There's other high clearance grain drills on the market. This is just a picture of the setup that another soil water conservation district I work with in Western New York has. It's a 6-row unit, so they can cover a little more ground. They have a air seeder, so they can interseed a fair amount of acres at a time. But there's this trade-off, right? So broadcast interseeding with much larger equipment, you have much less labor costs. You're able to interseed a lot more acres. But I think the challenge is that you essentially are going to be much less consistent within fields or across years as far as establishing cover crops with broadcast seeding methods compared to drilling cover crops earlier in the season when we can ensure that we're getting good seed to soil contact with a drill, okay? So a little bit of a trade-off there as far as costs and labor costs. and successful establishment. And so this is just a little bit of data where we compared drill interseeding in Bradford County to highboy broadcast interseeding in corn. This is just one data point, but this is what we've seen in the past when we've compared those establishment methods. We get a better catch or a better stand establishment when we're drilling. And also what we'll talk about a little bit today as well is that one of the challenges is when we want to be able to interseed cover crop mixtures to gain multiple benefits. There's some additional kind of logistics we have to think through as far as consistently establishing that mixture and getting good uniformity of the mixture. Okay, so that's establishment method, and if we're just focusing then on drill interseeding and the benefits of drill interseeding cover crops, one of the challenges I think and what we struggle with is to accurately characterize the conservation benefit that we're getting from this practice. And if you think about post-harvest seeding cover crops, or even at this time of year, even earlier, in any given field, you're going to have some variability in growth and establishment due to soil properties and that kind of thing. When we're trying to establish cover crops using this relay cropping practice, we have this additional kind of variation in how much corn competition we're getting within the field or across fields, right? And so that really influences the performance of those interseeded cover crops. And so quite often we get a fair amount of variability in how much growth we get throughout the field or from one field to another, okay? And that's due to the level of competition that we're getting from corn, okay? And so if we think about most of the conservation benefits that we care about, they're very strongly correlated to the amount of biomass production that we get from cover crops, right? Whether it's soil erosion protection or whether it's nitrogen scavenging, and we're thinking about nutrient management benefits. And then also, if we're thinking about interseeding as a method to get more diversity out there and incorporating legumes and brassicas, the question is how variable is that expression of those cover crop mixtures? And that's another one of the challenges that we see. So just a couple of pictures. So here's the case. When we do this on a very small plot scale, we're dealing with a lot less soil variation. And there's been years where we've had stands like this in the spring, which is a very successful kind of stand establishment from drill interseeding cover crops. So this is annual ryegrass that was drill interseeded between 30-inch corn rows at about the V4 or V5 stage. But here's some pictures from recent strip trials that we've done on farms. So this is a site in Niagara County in western New York from a few years ago. This 6-row area is where the interseeder strip was. And I think in April, if you see that much green matter out there and you're going to continue to let that cover crop grow, I think you're getting a lot of conservation benefit in that case. And that grower was quite pleased with the establishment and with that practice. But we also had strip trials that looked like this, right, where we had much more uneven establishment throughout the field, okay? And somewhere between this picture and the previous one, I start to question whether the return on investment is there, okay? And whether this is an improvement beyond what you might get from some winter annual weeds, because you still have to manage that with broadcast herbicide applications to be able to kill that cover crop. And the question is, how much conservation benefit did you get from something where you have that much variability? So just to show a little bit more data from the SARE project, where we had 13 strip trials over the course of 2 years. And we were in western New York, in the northern tier, and as well as Cambria County and Blair County. And it was a pretty simple trial where we just compared a no cover crop strip to the same mixture that was used across all those locations. And some farmers also choose something different to compare. And so our mixture was annual ryegrass, medium red clover, and forage radish. And so this is what the data looked like when we came back in late December to each one of those locations after the corn was taken off, and we took cover crop biomass. And you can see kind of the range of variability that we deal with, having looked at this across a number of different kind of production systems. And so the green bars are the annual ryegrass, the orange or brown bars are forage radish, red is medium red clover, right? And so you can see that we're getting a fair amount of variation in both biomass production, but also the expression of the mixture.
Were the herbicide programs prior to interseeding the same?
Great question. Very leading question that I appreciate. So we did not try to control for the herbicide program. We definitely suggested the herbicide programs that they needed we thought, to make this successful, and we'll talk more about this in the field this afternoon. We had a few farms that still went out there with Acuron, and so I'm not pointing those out. We don't have enough kind of paired comparisons to demonstrate what those longer lived programs do compared to shorter programs. And so the question is about herbicide programs. We'll get into this in a lot more detail this afternoon, but in general, that there needs to be a change in your weed control program or your weed control approach to make this happen when you're drill interseeding cover crops 5 or 6 weeks after corn planting. If you're using herbicide programs that we see a lot of in Pennsylvania, things like Lumax or Lexar or Acuron programs, those products stick around for too long. The length of residual activity is too long, and they end up injuring cover crops. And we have some great demonstration trials to kind of show that to you today. Okay, so I think where we're going to kind of mostly talk about today is more of the details. So those are kind of the big picture, I think, challenges and opportunities. a lot of equipment. Sorry about that. So one of the things I want to stress is that defining what your management goal is really the most important step, because it dictates the approach, and there's lots of small details that need to be rearranged to make interseeding successful depending on what your management objective is. A big part of that is what species do I want to establish, right? And so if soil erosion protection or nutrient management is your chief objective and goal for interseeding, it's going to dictate what species we might want to use, okay? If you want to use interseeding to create diversity and get more species out there in your production system, that's going to change how we think about the interseeding mixture and the herbicide program and all these other details, okay? And we're going to have some talks coming up about thinking about interseeding not as necessarily a cover crop, but as a forage crop, okay? That's another level of detail that we need to think about and make some small adjustments. Okay, so that's where we're headed. My program and what you're going to hear from me today is talking about herbicide program approaches that you need to think about. We're also going to talk about kind of cultural management practices. So how can we manage corn to make a little more room for cover crops without taking much of a yield impact. And